There is a long history of Hindu-Muslim conflict going back to almost 1300 years in India. But apart from that, if you see the recent conflict, to my mind, this conflict is enshrined in the very constitution which was agreed upon in 1950 and adopted by the new independent state of Bharat. What is the problem? And I very clearly, without any hesitation, call it a problem. What is the problem which is rooted in our constitution? You see, most people refuse to admit this. Most people do not talk about it in very clear terms because they think it is not a matter of certain constitutional rights which are clashing, but it is a matter of failure either at the religious level or at the level of priests and organization, temples and churches and mosques and organization, or they think it is merely a conflict between orthodox Maulvis and forward looking people in India. Now, having said that, one has to pinpoint as to where this problem becomes constitutional. I would put it this way. First of all, the very division of the Indian population into minority and majority on the basis, largely on the basis of religion, language, or something very indecisive such as culture. Division of the Indian population into minority and majority on the basis of religion, culture, language, etc., is something which was not part of the Indian social system earlier. We had various kinds of communities. We had various kinds of religious denominations, dharmic, Brahmic, and within the dharmic, various kinds of divisions like Shaiva, Vaishnava, Bauddha, Astik, Nastik, Lingayat, and various other matantaras, and people living in all kinds of diversity. But we never looked upon these people in terms of minority or majority. For instance, let me take a very specific example. There were some communities, you can today, in modern terms, call them religious communities, or in ancient times, you would call them communities based on a darshana, or on a mata, or a matantara, or a prasthan. These are some of the ancient terms which were used for denomination. What is now used as denomination in judicial discourse and even in constitution. That denomination was indicated by all these words which I just used: prasthan, mata, matantara, darshana, etc. So there were communities which were very small in number. For instance, let me take a community of Pashupatas of 2nd, 3rd century AD, who were Shaivas, and they believed in their founder as Pashupatinath, and they were called Pashupatas, and they were largely Shaiv, and they followed the Shaiv darshan. But they had a lifestyle and they had a method of worship, they had their temples, and it is all historically recorded. And the tradition is still alive in some parts of Gujarat. Now, these people were never in very large number, but nobody considered them insignificant or nobody considered them uh, mm, socially backward, or to be helped, or to be compensated, or to be looked after because they were few in number. You see, this whole concept that we have to look upon a community in terms of its numerical strength is a modern phenomenon. And let me tell you, it is not a democratic phenomenon. Today, wherever there is democracy, it has a role to play in seizing power through democratic means. But then, this whole business of people belonging to a way of life or thought or philosophy and having a certain number, this is a classification which was done by the colonial people. The colonizers of Europe, the British, the Germans, the French, the Portuguese, the Belgians, all these people, when they came to their colonies, they started studying the people, their ways of life, under what they called ethnography, ethnology, or ethnic studies. Ethnic is a Greek word. In ancient Greek, it meant jati or a community. And this word ethnos was used by colonial anthropologists in order to indicate the description of the people whom the colonizers were governing. So let us take our example. The British come here, they say, who are the people living? They say the people living are Hindus, they are Muslims. Among Muslims, you have various smaller and larger other subdivisions. Similarly, among Hindus, you would have subdivisions. They classified the whole thing, they analyzed the whole thing, they made anthropological charts of the population, and it became the basis of their defining the ruled, defining the population whom they were going to govern. And then they developed a whole, along with anthropology and anthropological descriptions, they developed a whole system of study which they called Indology in the case of India, or Africology, or whatever in the case of other. And there they said that, well, these are the people whom we are governing. And these people are this, 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 this. Now, this kind of division was never done in either ancient India or in medieval India, because the population was recognized in terms of certain very simple, verifiable communities, and the state had an approach to them. For instance, the Islamic rulers of India, they considered largely all Hindus as non-believers, non-Muslims, as kafirs, as people whom they had a right, a God-given right to govern. And therefore, for them, it hardly mattered whether somebody was a Buddhist, or if somebody was a Shaiv or a Jain. So, for them, the biggest classification was worshipper of images, Buddh Parasta, somebody who worships images. So then the Jains and the Buddhas and the Vaishnavas, and they are all alike. And then you had a right to destroy them, you had a right to govern them, you had a right to convert them. Now, this was the Islamic system. In this, there was nothing called an analysis or control of the population by defining them, because they never bothered to define. They said either you are Muslim or you are a non believer. So the division was very clear between a Momin, a believer, a Muslim, and a non Muslim. The British started a whole different method of approach of governance. The Islamic principles of governance were based upon a very simple distinction, the distinction of believer and non believer. So the non believer would have to pay jizya, the non believer would have to live within certain limits, the non believer would have to be protected, or the non believer could be treated in whatever way the Sharia law prescribed. The British come and adopt a very different method. They provide a framework of liberality, equality, a liberty, the French Revolution values, but within that, they categorize people. And then they say, well, if you belong to this community, then this is your right and no more. If you belong to the other community, then this is your right and no more. So, this classification of making distinctions between communities and giving them specific or individual rights is something which Western anthropology, Western colonial attitude brings into India. And this is the beginning of what may be called the anthropological study of India or anthropological classification through Western terms. You see, it is not universal or it is not humanitarian. It's based upon the interest of the governors, the white people, and the white man's burden. So, this classification included for them a distinction of minority and majority. This begins after 1857 in India.